Hey everyone, it's Alexander, the real Mr. Robinson. Welcome to the channel. This is my review for Avatar: The Way of Water, the long-awaited sequel to James Cameron's 2009 film. The movie takes place about 14 years after the events of the first Avatar. Jake, Neytiri, and the Omaticaya people have successfully driven away the RDA and humans off Earth, with the exception of a handful of scientists. Jake and Neytiri now have 4 kids. 3 of them are their own, and 1 of them is adopted. But unfortunately, nothing can last forever on Pandora, and suddenly all the peace that they've been having for 13 years is ruined when the humans return to Earth, this time with the intention of colonizing Pandora. They're no longer after unobtainium. They plan to move here because Earth is really a shithole. And unfortunately, with this new group of humans, there are also a group of Avatar soldiers. One of them is the resurrected Colonel Miles Quaritch. So because Quaritch is back, Jake, Neytiri, and their kids have to go into hiding, and they seek refuge among the Metkayina people. Basically, it's a group of Na'vi that are able to live at the water and are physically different than the Omaticaya people. So here it is, after many years of talks about an Avatar 2, and the fact that James Cameron is working on several other sequels, we finally get the first one. It was something that I didn't think would actually happen, but here we are. And I've made my stance on the first movie very clear. I still love it. It does have a lot of issues, like the theme of colonialism is something that normally would irritate the hell out of me, but for some reason in Avatar, it doesn't bother me a whole lot. I do see the parallels, but because they're aliens, I guess it doesn't bother me as much as something like with Pocahontas, but I still think it's great. It works much better on a visual level than the story level, but still pretty fantastic. And with this movie coming out, I had really high expectations because James Cameron has made 2 of the greatest sequels of all time, Aliens and Terminator 2. And I'm also one of the few people out there that thinks Piranha 2: The Spawning is better than Joe Dante's Piranha, but that's not really a good movie at the end of the day. And upon my first viewing of Avatar: The Way of Water, after many years of waiting for a sequel to come out, I didn't love it. Now, that's not to say I dislike the movie, it's just considering James Cameron's filmography, his history with sequels, and just how much I think he's an incredible director, this movie left me feeling a little let down. Let me talk about the positives first of all, because I ultimately liked this movie more than I didn't. And much like with the first Avatar, this film is just visually impressive. Its biggest breakthrough is the underwater sequences where the actors had to learn free diving while wearing motion capture trackers. And these underwater sequences, while all CG, it feels stunning. It really looks like these characters are underwater, and especially when you watch it in 3D, it looks amazing. All the wildlife in this movie fits very much within the rules that the first movie set up, and they look impressive. And if you've ever been on Flight of Passage at Disney's Animal Kingdom, then you got a sneak preview of not just some of the creatures here, but the Metkayina clan in general. I like the designs of the village for the Metkayina people, and the way these particular Na'vi look is pretty cool as well. They have different facial features. Their hands are more like flippers, or half hands, half flippers, to allow them to swim better in the water. Their tails are stronger than that of the Omaticaya people. There really is a lot of creativity and hard work put into the design department, much like with the first Avatar. As for the characters themselves, we still have Jake and Neytiri, played once again by Sam Worthington and Zoe Saldaña, and I gotta say Sam Worthington has kind of improved in his acting. Maybe he just works better in motion capture performances than in live action, because I felt a lot for Jake in this movie, having to be a father. Even though it's been about 13 years, he still has sort of a soldier mentality like he did in the first Avatar. So having to take care of his family and act more like a father than a soldier is something he constantly has to struggle with. It's not too deep or anything, but I found it interesting. Zoe Saldaña as Neytiri is just as great as ever. There's a lot of real great scenes with her and a lot of heartbreak with this character, which she cannot catch a break. But unfortunately, I didn't think Neytiri did a whole lot in this movie compared to the first one. I still stand by the fact that Neytiri should be our main focus rather than Jake, because she's more interesting. And I feel like from this point on, telling the stories from her perspective, having married an Avatar, and having a family with him while humanity is back on Pandora is more interesting than seeing it through Jake's eyes. But that's just me. As for the kids, the acting is mostly good. No one is flat out bad, but most of the kid characters aren't super interesting. You've got the older son who wants to basically be like his father and be a warrior. You've got the second born who's kind of a screw up and often gets messed around with by the older brother. You have the youngest who's just mainly there to be cute. And then you have the second youngest daughter, Kiri, who's played by Sigourney Weaver. This character is pretty much the adopted daughter of both Jake and Neytiri. It is kind of weird knowing that Sigourney Weaver is essentially playing a teenager, but considering the character's background, it makes perfect sense. And Sigourney Weaver, by default, is the best actor among all of Jake and Neytiri's kids, which isn't really fair to the other actors considering that they haven't been around as long as Sigourney Weaver has. Quaritch is back, like I mentioned earlier. He's now a recombatant, basically an Avatar soldier with the memories of a deceased soldier. And he isn't over the top and hammy like he was in the first Avatar, because in that first movie, he was a great villain, and a lot of his dialogue was reminiscent of aliens. This time around, Quaritch has a little more character depth. He's a more sinister villain, mainly because he's out for revenge, so it makes perfect sense that this character is not as over the top as he was in the first movie. There are some interesting character moments involving Quaritch and another character in this movie who I won't go into full detail about, who I won't even mention in this review. You'll just have to see the movie for yourself. The action, of course, is flat out stellar. James Cameron is an excellent action director, and unlike the first Avatar, there are a few sequences in this movie where it attempts to push an R rating. There's some dismemberment, there are some gnarly headshots, and it is just pretty cool to watch. The action I felt like was a lot more impactful this time around than the first movie. Now here's all the stuff that I wasn't too crazy about. This is a long movie. It clocks in at 3 hours and 12 minutes, which sure, James Cameron made Titanic, which was almost 3.5 hours long, but you never felt the length in that movie. And even though the first Avatar is shorter than both those movies, you never felt the length for that either. This time around, however, you really feel that 3-hour length, and the story does not justify this movie being as long as it is, because there's a lot of world building in this movie, more than we probably needed, because we're already familiar with the world of Pandora. It's just we're seeing it from a different ecosystem, essentially. But the rules are the same. There's also a lot of characters and plot points in this movie that are introduced, but go nowhere. They are left unanswered, and I think that's to save those answers for a potential third movie, which is supposed to come out 2 years from now. James Cameron did shoot the second and third Avatar movies back to back, and the third one is currently in post-production, so maybe we'll get our answers with the third one. But right now, the fact that these plot points are here and the characters introduced in this movie go nowhere, it's unfortunately a letdown. The next problem I have might just be a simple nitpick, but it did bug me throughout the movie. There are a few moments in the score where it lifts music cues directly from the first Avatar, and I'm not talking about rearrangements or rescoring sessions. I'm talking about stock music from the first movie put into this one, and it was often distracting and just reminded me of the first Avatar film. But the original score itself, when it's not lifting music cues from the first movie, is really good. The composer is Simon Franklin, who had worked with James Horner for a long time. He was actually the producer on the song My Heart Will Go On from Titanic, so he's clearly a great protege for the late James Horner. Rest in peace. And I think had this movie not taken cues from the first film, he could have made an incredible original score, but those music cues taken from the first Avatar at points distracted me. Another thing that distracted me, and I don't know how much this is going to affect people who see it, is the high frame rate. When I reviewed Gemini Man back in 2019, I mentioned that James Cameron was planning to shoot the Avatar sequels at a high frame rate. And he did, but when I saw this movie at the press screening, it's like some sequences were at a high frame rate and others were not. And I heard that when the first movie got remastered and released back in September this year, that some theaters did the same thing, and people were saying, oh, James Cameron has cracked the high frame rate problem. And I'm watching this movie at a high frame rate and going, no, he didn't. I'm still not really sold on high frame rate being used in movies. Like, just stay with the theme parks. High frame rate works great in theme park attractions, like Jurassic World The Ride, like King Kong 360 3D, but having to sit in a 3-hour plus movie with the frame rate switching back and forth is very distracting. So that's all I have to say in terms of the stuff I didn't like about The Way of Water. Throughout most of this movie, I didn't really feel any emotional gut punches. It didn't move me the way the first film did. But once we got into the third act, things started to pick up. There's a lot more tension, there are more stakes. So at the end of the day, I'd say with how I'm feeling right now, it's a good movie. It's not a great movie. I was let down by the fact that this movie didn't surpass the first one in terms of quality like Aliens and T2 did, but maybe it was because of the high frame rate. That really irritated me to no end. I do plan to see the movie again in regular 3D at 24 frames per second, and I feel like maybe on that second viewing, my opinion might change on this movie. And also, in terms of these plot points that go nowhere, maybe when the third movie comes out, I'll go, oh, so this leads to that, so that makes a whole lot of sense, but right now, this is my least favorite James Cameron movie. But like I said with Titanic, considering this man's track record, that is not saying much. It's still a good movie at the end of the day that is worth seeing in theaters, especially in 3D, but it's not a sequel that's better than the first one. And there you go, that's my review for Avatar: The Way of Water. I hope you enjoyed it. And now I want to know what you guys think about the movie. If you've seen it, what did you think? Whatever the case may be, let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell button to get notifications. You can also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, go check out my Twitch channel, and support me on Patreon. I'll see you guys in the next video, but until then, have a good day, and take care of yourselves.